morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're based, but I'd like to take a minute and welcome you to the Energy Central and Utility 2030 Power Talk entitled Bold Utility Leadership in an Era of Shifting Priorities and Workforce Challenges. My name is Mike Smith. I'm with Utility 2030. I will be your moderator for today's discussion. Before we do get started, I wanted to take just a moment and thank HSI for sponsoring today's event. We've been working with them on a broader research project, and they've been great partners. So thanks to the HSI team for sponsoring today's event. Now let's get started. What we're going to do is I'm going to introduce both of our guests here with us today. And then as I introduce each one, I'm going to ask them a question to get the ball rolling. So first I want to introduce Alan Hare, who is the Technical Training Manager for CenterPoint Energy. In his current role, Alan oversees technical training for Indiana electric and gas storage fields across CenterPoint. He leads a team that coordinates, leads, trains, and develops programs to provide relevant training to the CenterPoint workforce. Outside of his responsibilities at CenterPoint, Alan serves on the Utility Safety and Operations Leadership Network Executive Board of Directors, which, if some of you are familiar with, you may know this, but if not, they are the folks responsible for the Certified Utility Safety Professional Program. So I'm sure some of you are seeing that, and if not, you'll see more of it in the future, I'm guessing. Alan also chairs the Ivy Tech Community College Steering Committee and participates in steering committees for Madisonville Community College and Frontier Community College. So obviously training and education are a big part of what Alan is all about. So we're going to get started. Alan, I'm going to ask you a question, just kind of starting big picture at a very high level. What are you seeing as some of the macro issues that utility leaders are struggling with today and in the foreseeable future? And of course, we could spend hours on that question, but maybe just a couple that hit close to home with what you're seeing in your role there at CenterPoint.
So probably some of the bigger issues would be the integration of renewable energy, really the rising energy demand kind of in correlation with that, and then also adoption of advanced technologies, going back to the first one. So the shift towards renewable energy sources like solar and wind presents both opportunities and challenges. And utilities need to understand the integration with that, with the intermittent sources into the grid, while ensuring stability and reliability. And then the rising energy demand, obviously the demand for electricity is increasing, driven by factors of the proliferation of electric vehicles and data centers. And utilities need to understand their capacity and improve the forecasting to meet the growth demand, both while balancing the need for the infrastructure and investments with the goal of keeping energy affordable. And I think, the affordability of the customers is a kind of a delicate task as well. They also must manage changing customer expectations or the more sustainable and reliable energy. I think anymore in the utility industry, we call it the Amazon effect. You call today, you get it tomorrow, and typically with hurricane or storms or whatever come through, you typically can't do that. It takes a bit for those putting the system back together at times. And then probably the other thing, I don't know if we'll get into this anymore, but the adoption of advanced technologies into whether it's AI or VR. We can talk about that in a bit if we need to.
Yeah.
But we can go at length on that.
Yeah, that's great. And I think we will get into some of that advanced tech stuff. But what's interesting is what you're pointing out is a lot of the work we're doing here at Utility 20 points to exactly what you're saying. And the trick is, okay, we're moving towards sustainability, but we're doing so while demand is growing, but we don't want to give up what we've hung our hat on for the last 110 years. And that's reliable, safe, affordable energy. And that's the trick. And I think the industry is at a point where, very much like our theme today around how do you set these priorities and do they have to shift as we move deeper into that energy transition. So thank you. That's a great way to get us started. I am going to introduce our other speaker today, and I want to take just a minute to do that, and then we'll hear from him as well. So Mark Streifel is the Managing Director of Industrial Skills at HSI, where he has more than 25 years of experience developing and delivering solutions and successful training programs. He has an environmental biology degree, then went to work at a power plant in North Dakota doing Title V and emissions control work. It is in this work that Mark discovered that he likes the power industry. So glad to have you as a 35-year veteran, Mark. Glad to have you. Mark helps HSI's industrial and utility customers design creative training packages that fit with their environment and needs. So same question for you, Mark. Just, what are you seeing and hearing when you're out there working with your utility customers? What's the thing that's challenging? Where are those points of friction? Where are the challenges and that you're seeing? And then we can get into maybe how we move forward past resolving those challenges.
Yeah, it's like you both talked about it. It's a staunch industry. It runs the way it wants to run, and the times are changing. It's just right there. It's the renewables. It's the data centers. It's the movement of baseload from rural America into inner cities because we don't want the baseload looks different. It's not these mammoth coal-fired monsters on the prairie anymore, and so now we can put a combined cycle footprint right outside of a metro area. And so, which is great because the grid and the transmission lines can't handle much more where they are. And so we got to get the generation closer to the demand areas, so then you're also moving the workforce around. And so, and that's been part of the problem as well. So, and, like Alan touched on, that integration of the renewables, the solar, the battery storage, how do we dispatch that? How do we maintain it? And then who maintains it, who dispatches it, who does that work, because all the tech is there, and we keep changing some of the curriculums in high school and trying to find people with that aptitude to do these jobs, and then the desire. That's where we're going to get to. I mean, so that's where we're at in a nutshell. So.
Okay, yeah, and interesting point you made there about where do you site a lot of these generation facilities, because yeah, transmission networks are overworked right now. They're old and overworked. I think that's something that as an industry we have to come to terms with, and it's going to be an expensive answer to that question, but I think we'll get there. So that's great. Great way to open the discussion. I do want to talk a little bit more about what you're seeing from these macro issues and maybe boil them down a little bit to where you're seeing the workforce. In particular, what are some of the gaps that you're seeing, and maybe how are utilities meeting these gaps? It could be through some innovative technology, it could be through partnerships, it could be through workforce programs. But one of the things that we see in the work here, and this may kind of point to where we want to go with this, but traditional utility, if they have let's say a generation fleet of either coal-fired or gas plants, and they're moving to 20, 30, 40, 50, 60% renewable energy, they're not going to need as many mechanics for power plants that they've had for the last 50 years, right? So maybe there's wind turbine technicians, maybe it's data and analytics people, maybe there's just some different skill sets out on the distribution grid as the nature of the grid changes. So what are some of those gaps you're seeing in the utility workforce? And then maybe let's talk about how utilities are meeting some of those gaps and filling those gaps. So I'm opening it up, whoever wants to jump in.
I'll start. I'll kick it off, and Mark, I'm sure can add to what I have to say. But the shift towards renewable energy and in particular, the combined cycle units require specialized knowledge in integrating these intermittent sources into the grid. So many workers need that additional training to manage and optimize the renewable energy systems. And those don't just happen. We're taking anything from an aging workforce that is really we're flipping the script. We called it the gray hair tsunami that happened about 5 to 10 years ago, and we're probably north on that now, where the workforce is becoming a lot younger. That is happening as we speak now, and it's still going on. And I believe, I saw a statistic that the workforce and will grow 8%, which was about 10,700 employees over the next 10 years. So that meaning we'll add to that workforce because of the need for whatever integration we have from renewable or solar or anything like that to also replacing and doing in helping out with the aging infrastructure as well.
Interesting stuff there, particularly about a growing workforce, because I think a lot of large organizations. Utilities are typically very large, you know, huge workforce, everything from trades out in the field to administrative to engineers, IT, et cetera. You know, one of the things that we're seeing and hearing, and Mark, I want to ask you this question because you work with a lot of different utilities. Are you seeing that the workforce that's coming in, they show up and on day one they're productive, or is there obviously there's a learning curve? You know, yeah, yeah, it is funny. Yeah, they're not probably too productive on day one, but what does that learning curve look like, and what are utilities doing again to get back to the original question of filling that gap around some of those workforce challenges, many of which I think are probably technical skills. So what does that look like in a utility?
One of the big things we're seeing is like, well, you look at, let's go back to, 20 years ago, the utilities would put, a year, 2 years into an apprentice, and we don't have that kind of time, nor do we even have the culture of the incoming employees that say, hey, I want to be an apprentice and get paid at apprenticeship level for the next 2 years of my life. They kind of want instant satisfaction in their job as well. So what utilities are getting better about doing is, is identifying skills and skills gaps in their current workforce. What actually is, what actually skills do we need, and then identifying where those skills exist outside the utility industry. And people are doing it to the utility industry as well, but we're trying to poach people from other industries saying, hey, these skills overlap. We just did a instrumentation and control class where 3 of those guys were ASE certified mechanics, but they had troubleshooting capabilities. They had, we'd hire them for a car dealership, but they had, some kind of base skill that we could go ahead and start training from. And then the big thing instead of the training, the full apprenticeship program, we're not training new hires as much to do the entire job. What we're doing is we're task training them. It kind of goes back to the old Navy and, military type training where we train someone to stand and watch. It's like, okay, I want you to do this, and this is part of your job, and this is your new skill. And then next 2 weeks from now, you're going to have another new skill. And then eventually they're going to be able to do their entire job, and then they're qualified, to work alone, and then also be, start looking at promotions. But we're seeing a lot more task training than we are, but where we lose some benefits there is that holistic approach of like how all these systems interact. And that's one of the biggest things we're having is we can teach people to do jobs and do tasks, but then they struggle with troubleshooting because they don't see the whole overall system and how all the pieces integrate. And so it's kind of a catch-22. And so it's really when you're teaching systems towards the end of the training program, as opposed to at the beginning, where it used to all be like, hey, this is how the systems work. You got to draw your one lines and you have to show where, process fluids tie over and things like that. We just don't see that type of training anymore. So.
Yeah, and again, that's one of those hallmarks of the utility is the reliable delivery of energy. And so hopefully that is not in peril at some point, because that's really what our so much of our culture and our society is driven by, will the light turn on, will the motor start, right? So let's explore this just a little bit more. I'm going to ask both of you. Mark, I'll ask you first. What are some specific skill sets that are maybe most lacking or most challenging for utilities to find as they're bringing new people in? Is there like a top 3 that you're seeing?
So my number one is always math. Okay, and it comes down to like how we teach math in the schools these days. Is we all teach math, and everybody goes, you don't need algebra. Even as adults, a lot of us don't think we need algebra, but we don't teach applied math anymore. Like, how do I use this in the field? I talked to you guys before the show. We're building a house. You watch. Have you ever tried to do a set of stair stringers? But you watch these people with very little education, but a lot of training. And they know how to do the trigonometry and how to do things. Where we don't see that in those troubleshooting skills. And so it's just really more that aptitude and things like that. And that's where we're even struggling to find talent. Or who do we train to start with? Trying to find those. I mean, we did. And somebody mentioned in the hall the other day is that how come Mike Rowe didn't do a clean jobs? Instead of just a dirty. Because this industry needs some promotion, like some, where do we recruit? How do we get kids interested? Because you look at all of our cybersecurity and the instrumentation, PLCs and everything, and everybody goes like, I want to be a computer programmer. It's like, you can be a computer programmer in a power plant because basically you have software controlling hardware, and so there's a lot of tech jobs in this industry that go unfilled, where I think we'd get kids excited about that if they knew what it was and what they were. So
Right. Okay. And now, how about you? What are you seeing at CenterPoint in terms of, again, I'll ask, the top three, which may not be a fair question, but what kind of resonates with you in terms of some of those more critical needs?
I think as you go into, as we have partnerships with many schools and trying to pull them in, it's always our message is like, we want them to come work for us, especially if they're, the folks that are local or whatever. We want them to come because if their roots are here, they're more likely to stay here, and that gives us longevity in their employment. But ultimately, what I want them to do, I want them to go work for a utility. If they want to work for us, that's great. If they want to go out to someplace out west because Arizona is a place they want to live, they want to get away from the heat, or they want to get to the heat and stay away from the cold, then they can most certainly go there. But the utility workers must possess a solid foundation of technical skills relative to the field, and you just don't see that anymore. Any more from us kind of teaching some of the basics of even how to read a stick ruler to the soft skills are probably one of the things that probably the tangible pieces that's not really direct related to their duties, but it's equally important. So understanding that the complex challenge or unexpected situations that requiring for them to critically think and solve problems efficiently. I think Mark, that's what he's talking about. Is like, you had a guy that's an ASA mechanic, then they move into a job because they possess the skills for problem solving and crucial identifying for troubleshooting issues. It's not necessarily taking that that round peg and putting it into a square hole anymore. It's trying to find the peg that's going to fit into the hole.
Mm-hmm.
And I really and I think probably one of the more key personality traits that they need is that the ability to adapt an ever-changing utility industry. We're from where I was 30 years ago to where we were to where we are today. The new technology, the regulations, and work environment that has changed so much. And then understanding that providing those services to our customers and opportunities for growth and innovation. They can help build careers that for the people is to cultivate a skilled workforce that powers our future. That ultimately, that's all we want. So
right, and that's kind of the crux of the issue is getting the people who want to do that and will invest their time and effort and energy and
you go into the high schools. We do these grassroots initiatives, and we go there and we told them about this is what you can make as a utility worker, and their eyes light up, and this
right.
Like, oh, I didn't know I could do that, and this is some of the these are the things that we can do to help you, and also we benefits, on the job training, the apprenticeship programs where you're getting paid, and those apprenticeships once they top out are also transportable to other utilities.
Yeah, and it's funny, you mentioned the eyes lighting up. There's one utility that we've done some work with, and when we talked about some of the bringing in the new workforce, they say, yeah, we have our own lineman kind of training process, and there's a kind of an introduction, and they do some recruitment, and periodically, every month or what quarter or whatever it is, they'll bring these folks in, and the process starts with them walking through the parking lot to where the classroom is. And they said they do that because they want them to see the kind of cars and trucks that linemen drive, because they make really good money. And that really captures, a 19-year-old who doesn't want a desk job and, sees a nice new Ford Bronco sitting in the parking lot. Wow, that's
you can always tell when there's a new hiring class comes in. You see a lot of new vehicles out in the parking lot.
Yeah. I do want to ask you, and that's a good segue because we've talked a lot about some of the training needs and skill gaps. Let's just spend a minute on recruiting. What are some of the things you're seeing where utilities are successful in recruiting these folks? It sounds like obviously connecting with local schools, be that at high school, junior college, or university level. I'm sure that's part of it. But what are some of the wrinkles within that may make some of those efforts more effective? What are you all seeing? Go
I'll
for it,
start, Mark.
Oh.
So I think building the partnerships with the schools and universities can help utilities create pipelines for the future. Internships, apprenticeships, co-ops, all that stuff can provide students with hands-on experience and encourage them to pursue careers in the utility sector. These are the things, like, kind of going back to what I said, is like getting them in here and exposing them to the utility space. And then, hopefully they'll come work for us. But if they don't, then hopefully they'll go work for another utility somewhere across the United States, and building those pipelines, or building those the future of our future. And then also understanding too how that workforce plans into, to understand how those strategic plans into our strategic goals, and understanding too, assessing the current gaps and understanding we're creating a roadmap to address these gaps, even getting in with those partnerships with the trade schools.
Mm-hmm.
Those are probably, getting them, like, I'd much rather have those partnerships with the trade schools, because then they're being exposed to what we do at our utility, and in comparison to what maybe someone else is doing in another utility.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's probably a pretty, to use a technology term, pretty seamless integration between a trade school and a utility with some very specific skill sets. Mark, what are you seeing on the recruiting side? What you're hearing from and seeing at all these different utilities you work with?
Yeah, you see, like, Alan, that's a good point. That's the first thing we usually recommend is, hey, do you have a trade school locally, or do you have, and we see a really good job across some areas, like down here in the southeast, and kind of where we're at in the Gulf Coast. We see it's all P-Tech programs, it's all process technology. So the refineries kind of have the market on it, and so we have to go to our energy clients, say, hey, you need to get in there as well, and start explaining to them that, hey, there's more jobs than just the refineries, and start, but they kind of lose some of the battle in some of this area, just to some of those programs, where we get more into the Midwest, and in the Northeast, we can kind of get more into some of those other jobs. So, but yeah, the utility, the trade schools are good. The other thing is, like I said, how do you hire out of other industries? That's a big recruitment, but it's just getting down into the high schools and starting getting some of those programs perfected. And get people excited about that. But I do like the trade schools instead of hiring direct, because then it exposes them. They get a little exposure to, hey, what's life going to be like in a utility, and they can kind of make that decision before. Because for a while, we've seen a lot of people, with no skills coming in, and they'd wash out of an apprenticeship program, or, an on-the-job training program pretty quick, because, and some utilities didn't do themselves justice, where, we had one utility where, their lineman program, all they did for the first 2 weeks was make them climb poles. Well, turns out only the stubborn ones that like to climb poles were the ones that were left, and some of the guys with the advanced troubleshooting skills and some of the other skills, they all left and found different jobs, and so they kind of washed out, some of their, some of the people with better aptitude that just didn't want to climb poles. And so, they've kind of changed a lot of that, so.
Okay. One thing, Alan, you said, I heard you use the word internship. Are you seeing, and to CenterPoint, do you have formal internship programs where some of these folks who are, again, at a trade school or junior college, they can intern with a utility and really get some of that hands-on and get a foot in the door and really start to build a career?
So there are programs that we have for internships. It's not necessarily field related, but anywhere from, utility is kind of weird. You only think about pipes and wires. That's what these people do. There's more to that. We have accounting. I have a geologist on staff. We have a multitude of different facets of the utility that people can get into, in anything from even as much as advertising, or even communications. These are all big pieces of it. And then I do know there are utilities that will offer field level internships. They'll go to the high school levels, and they'll take a senior that's going to be in high school, and they'll put them with a line crew for like a summer help job. We don't have it here, but they do have it in other utilities, and I think that's innovative in itself.
Yeah, get them exposed to that and see if they like it. And again, I know a lot of, I'm pretty old, so a lot of our kids' peers, some of them, I don't want a desk job, and one of our friend's sons, he went and got an AS in welding technology, and he's making great money and having fun. So those opportunities are out there for sure. I do want to, as we kind of get close to the end here, I do have kind of one question that's kind of a fun one. If you were a utility executive, let's say you're CEO for a day, and you really want to change that workforce dynamic, particularly in a very, to Mark's point, very competitive marketplace for some of that young talent. What's the one thing that you would do to help your organization meet those workforce needs? What would that look like if you were CEO for a day and that's the one thing, Mark, you wanted to leave on the organization? Mark, what would you do?
I encourage every CEO to figure out their human assets. Like, what is every knowledge asset, like, that you have in your company today? Spend that time to actually, because we got a lot of, we already have the gray hair tsunami. Well, I'm looking at the cameras on this, and it looks like another one coming.
We're all right there. Yep.
Yeah. And so, how do you get all that knowledge? Because you don't know exactly, the skills required to run your organization, but you don't know the actual individuals that have those skills. And so when each person's going to retire, you need to hire for those, for those job roles and those skills. And so it's just really a knowledge mapping of, the entire industry, of your entire workforce, so that you know who you have, what you have. And later on, that just allows you to plan shifts and plan crews and succession planning and everything else. And I guess that's what I would look at. So.
Right. Yeah, and a lot of that's just kind of that basic workforce blocking and tackling, right? Know where you are and where you want to get to and where those gaps are. How about you, Alan? You're CEO for a day.
Actively have a plan and actively recruit. Understanding where you are and what your needs are, and actively have that plan to do that. And then make your company desirable to come work for. That everyone wants to come to work for you. That's what you want. You want people to come work for you. Ultimately, you want the best talent wherever you go, and that, believe me, if you're not a company that somebody wants to work for, that word gets around just as quickly as you're one that everyone wants to work for.
Right.
So those are the things you want to do, and so you want to get into the grassroots piece of that as well.
Good. Those are two great notes to end on in terms of that workforce mapping and knowing where you are in that space, and being actively recruiting and making sure you're an organization that people want to work for. Very good. So thanks, Mark and Alan, for sharing your time and expertise. Great conversation. Again, thanks to HSI for making today's event possible. And on behalf of everyone at Energy Central, HSI, and Utility 2030, thank you for joining us on today's event. We'll look forward to you at future events. That wraps up what we're doing for today, so we'll hope to see you again soon. Thanks and take care.
Thank you.
Thanks.